So when things get down to it, it looks like we have pretty much a meta where it's going to be either you play purple or you just go and play something else and hope that you win. But the big thing with this is that it looks like there's maybe a couple of other decks that might stand a chance at taking it to the meta. We're going to be looking into which underdog decks might actually be able to dethrone the League of Draven. All of that and more starting right now. So yeah, this is the biggest thing because it's like, yeah, we're in the League of Draven, where he is really going to be one of the best, if not the best deck in the format, with the most regional wins and just absolutely dominating the local Nexus Knights. Now, that really kind of sucks. We don't want it to be that way, but as of right now, it looks like that's at least how it's going to be until we start developing some answers against such a powerful deck. And hopefully this video will help keep you in the right direction if you don't want to necessarily play those. This is where we're at. Now, with the regionals coming up too, this is going to be very telling. Are we going to just have two Draven wins in Italy and in Vegas? Are we going to just be able to watch maybe a new deck rise to the top? I don't necessarily know yet. I can't see the future. I wish I could. But as of right now, here's a couple of decks that are going to be maybe contending against the best of the best decks. Now, big thing too, there are going to be timestamps down in the comments below, as well as all the deck lists for you to be able to look at, and we are going to be going into 3 of those. So, one thing that I really like about these deck lists is they can really almost catch your opponent a little bit off guard. Now, what I mean by that in particular is going to be that it's not necessarily one that people are anticipating coming in. I mean, even at this point, it's like you flip over Annie and people are like, why are you playing Annie? Why don't you just play Draven? He's the better Annie. And it's like, yes, I can definitely argue that, but one thing that I think makes Annie stand out above the rest is the fact that you get 2 ready, 2 runes at the end of every turn. And there's some really cool combos that you're able to do with that. Now, why is those 2 extra runes so important? Well, when you take a look at the deck list in particular, it is incredibly powerful because, for example, if you have like a hard bargain in hand, which allows you to counter a spell, well, that's a lot more power that you're able to utilize there because you have the guaranteed two runes up. Draven doesn't. Yes, he does get the guaranteed card draw, but that's it, you know, and don't get me wrong, that is incredibly powerful. But at the same time, it's like, all right, cool. Well, what do you now have to anticipate here with my deck list as Annie? Do I have a fight or flight hidden? And then even after that, still have another answer in hand with my 2 runes up? If I have a stacked deck in hand and a card hidden, I can search for an answer and then be able to play it out with my runes that are still up from me activating my legend ability. And this is something that I absolutely love. And for those of you who don't know, this was the deck that actually got first place here in the regionals tournament. And so really cool to be able to see what this is able to do. Now, I will say that there are a couple of issues with this deck that I do want to watch out and warn you about. First and foremost, yes, the card draw is just not going to be nearly as good as what we had last set with Annie. As you can see, this is a lot more of a unit-heavy Annie deck, and there's a good reason for that, but that's also going to be to your detriment because instead of running the scrap heaps and stack decks and even trying to maybe go for the Ezreal and Miracle combo that we know, instead we are going with this version here, and that could be a little bit tough because if you end up going really low on your card draw and they're able to take care of your board state, which is going to be really hard to do, but then you struggle. And you're just not necessarily going to be able to come back into the game. Now, I've played this deck at a couple of my local Nexus Knights, and it did really well. I was able to take down 2 Dravens and an Aurelia with that, and it managed. You know, I was actually very impressed with it. Now, one thing that I do have to say is there's some really cheeky stuff that you can do with Rengar. Why? Well, because yes, he is a unit that is 3 in a power at 3 might, but even still, he also can be played at reaction speed. Why is that important? Well, there's a couple of times in your turns that you're going to have 1 rune left up because there's just nothing that you're able to do. So you ready up 2 runes. Well, Rengar can be played in that situation. Now, yes, he only has Assault 2. He doesn't just get +2 when attacking or defending. That'd be absolutely crazy, but awesome. But instead, if your opponent activates an ability, or if he tries to do a showdown, anything like that, then you can attach Rengar either to the battlefield or play him out in your base. If you play him out in your base, then guess what? Next turn, he's going to be able to attack in for 5, and that's something that can really catch your opponent off guard. So again, this is just really fun, and it was so cheeky to be able to like play it out, and your opponent just is like, wait, can you do what? And it's usually also something that they're not necessarily able to prepare for, which is something I absolutely love. Then not only that, one thing that is so nice about being able to go against Draven is that you have a lot of the answers that Draven is going to be using against you, except that you are going to be able to utilize them maybe a little bit better on his turn. So that's something really nice for you to be able to do. Likewise, the side decking sometimes can be a little bit tricky here because it's like, well, what do I initially want to even side deck in? And it's like, well, against Draven, I really do like doing the Rengar and Draven kind of answers here, if you so choose. One thing that really is helpful when you are going against Draven is that you need to be able to go a little bit wider than what he is able to do. Now, you are going to maybe have to deal with fight or flights and things like that. Okay, that's perfectly fine. So if that's the case, again, usually they only have 1 card hidden and no runes up, or maybe 1 or 2 runes up. If that's the case, well, you can utilize your fight or flights, you can utilize your rebukes, and then be able to attack in and get things taken care of. And so that's going to be the balance here. Then also just with Draven being in, he readies up. You then attack in with him. They fight or flight him back. Yes, you give your opponent a card, but then you play out 2 cards, like, for example, a Cleave and a Stack deck, or like a Poro or a Titan, whatever you want to play out. You play out 2 cards, then Darius readies right back up and attacks right in. Now, I do like to side out, for example, like I hate siding out Noxus Hopeful just because it can go so well with the Darius. But I do side out like 1 Draven and 1 Noxus Hopeful usually with that. It's just normally a good option there. If I am going second, then I am okay with like siding out 1 Poro and 1 Draven in that case for like the Darius. Now, the Mind Splitters can be a really good asset for you to be able to use because, again, if your opponent is already going to be a little bit low on the card draw, or you just need to get rid of the answers that they have in hand, well, the Mind Splitter is going to be just an absolute powerhouse for you to be able to do so. Not only that, it has 7 might, so this is just a fun option for you to be able to go in and be either able to defend a battlefield or to be able to go and really just pick out a card from your opponent and still be able to have a dangerous board presence at the same time. So the big thing with this, too, that I really like is that it does still have a decent Kai'Sa matchup, which can sometimes be a little bit difficult. Kai'Sa blows up the board a lot. Well, after they spend all their spells, and then it's like, oh, by the way, here's a Rengar, Kai'Sa is running a lot more lower to the ground units, and so they don't normally always have runes up on their opponent's turn. So after they blow up your board and you're like, okay, well, here's Rengar, or they do a Void Seeker and you flash your units back to the base so that they can't be hit, awesome. That can be a really big difference maker for you. I also got to say real quick before we move on to the next deck list, I really do like invert timelines here. It is one that you can side out if you don't necessarily worry about, or if you don't want to give your opponent 4 cards. There's many decks out there that can struggle with card draw, for example, like Fiora, Jax, and a couple of other off the top of the head. But at the same time, your cards are more powerful and valuable than what most times your opponent is going to be running. And so if you're down to 1 card and it's just a dead card in hand, it's like I don't need a traveling merchant in my hand right now. All right, cool. Well, let's play 3 out and get invert timelines, refill my hand with 4 cards, and call it good. Just really love this addition to the deck, and it's made a really big difference. Especially when you're going against like miracle builds or going against Dravens in general. There were times where my opponent had 7 cards in hand, and I was just like, yeah, those are gone, and you have 4 cards in hand now. And especially when they do things like called shots or stack decks and everything, and they work through to build up their cards and to build up that perfect hand, and you're like, that hand's gone, now you get 4 random cards, that can really hurt. Love what that is able to do, and I think that this is a deck that can continue to contend. Now, next, of course, I really am a big believer in Azir, and I think we got something very special here with this deck in particular. Now, just for you who don't know, Azir says specifically that your Sand Soldiers have Weapon Master, meaning that when they pop into the battlefield, they're able to take a equipment. So whether that's attached to someone or not, they're able to do so. Now, of course, at the cost of 1 power less. So if it has any more than a power cost, then of course you have to pay that. But we play cards that don't do so. Then on top of that, you can pay 1 and tap, and you can play a 2 might Sand Soldier unit token to your base, but you use only if you've played an equipment this turn. Well, this is really cool because guess what? There's no units in this deck. But that's not something that necessarily slows you down. Why? Because you have a million different ways to be able to create either Sand Soldiers or to put out equipment so that they're able to take it over. So one thing that I absolutely love is that you can start with either a Doran's Shield or an Eye of the Herald. And starting with an Eye of the Herald is probably one of the best starts that you're able to get, because every time that Eye of the Herald moves, you then are able to create a 1 might recruit unit token. Wow, okay, that's awesome. Love that. Not only that, too, there's some really surprising tricks that you can use in this deck that can throw off your opponent. Now, guards is going to be one of them. Why? Well, 1, it can be hidden. Next to that, you can also play a 2 Sand Soldier unit token, but because you're playing Azir, it has Weapon Master. So it's like, alright, cool, well, can you deal with me adding 5 might? Because you can just grab a BF sword from someone over in base, and be like, oh, thank you for that sword. It now gets +3, and I'm at 5 now. Can you win? These are the kinds of tricks that can really throw your opponent off, and especially something that they don't necessarily, or that they aren't necessarily prepared for. Likewise, on the other end, you have Brutalizer. Cool. Well, by the way, I can play guards, and Brutalizer attaches. Oh, by the way, that's not +1, that's +3. Okay, cool. Like, I'm totally okay with that. And then on top of that, one of the absolute best combos that I love about this deck is Death Grip. You have a unit in the base, and it has, you know, the BF sword attached to it. Your opponent attacks in, and you're like, oh, by the way, Death Grip. I destroy that 5 might unit. I add 5 might to this unit. Can you get over that? Oh, by the way, I also draw a card. All right, cool. And especially being at reaction speed, that can be really helpful because your opponent's going to be like, all right, I have an action card that I play. Now I'm tapped out, so you now get the priority. All right, cool. Well, I blew up this unit to give all the might to this unit. I win. You know, so there's some really cool combos there. Then not only that, I really do like Eye of the Herald on creating units, because then you can use stuff like Hidden Blade, for example, or Cull of the Weak to be able to destroy those 1 might units that aren't really necessarily helpful to you, but they are in this case because either you're going to be drawing 2 cards or you're able to destroy one of your 1 might units to destroy something incredibly important on the other side. This is something that I just absolutely love, because especially when your opponent isn't necessarily prepared for it, and you're already doing decent enough board control, or you're even at the beginning of the game, and they play out their unit to help get things moving, like they play an Ezreal, they play a Lucian, something important out, and you just say, all right, Cull of the Weak. And it's dead. You know, so it's a lot of fun here. Then also, one of the big cards that I do really like in this is Sacred Shears. Very important, because when the unit that this is attached to dies, is going to be allowing you to draw one, which just refills your hand. Now, one of the best I love this signature spell, but again, you got to be careful, because one of the hardest parts is making sure that you have enough equipment out. But man, if you do, this can be the end-all option for you. You have to play around maybe some hard bargains and be prepared for that. But if you aren't necessarily worried and you play out an Arise, even if you get 3 or 4 units, usually you want 4 or more. But man, if you get 3 or 4, this can be really big, especially because you get to ready 2 of them. So you play out 4 Sand Soldiers, you take the BF Sword here, you take the Brutalizer here. Just like that, you have 10 might that's ready to go, and you can move in and just take a battlefield. You know, and this is why I think this is a great answer against Draven decks, because one thing that you can really thrive with is going incredibly wide. Because when you attack into a Draven, or when you attack into purple, and all they're like is, well, I have a Fight or Flight, I have a Rebuke. That sucks. What can you do about that when you have 3 units that are attacking in all at, 5 or 4 might? Not necessarily a whole lot, which is why I think that this is such a great asset for you to be able to utilize at your local Nexus Nights, or even at regionals alike. And this is just such a fun deck for you to be able to do. Now, one of the difficult things about this deck is that it falls to gear destruction. When you are going against Kaisas or Dravens, there's that spell that just destroys all gear, period. That's the hard part. If that spell comes about, then it's like, well, we got to be prepared for that, which is why we have Wind Wall in the side deck. But again, you're even still hoping that they don't have that, and it can slow you down, because you gotta leave 3 runes up and anticipation of them just destroying all of your stuff. So that can be a little bit of a downside. Also, this deck can sometimes be a little bit slow on the card draw. I mean, yes, you do have things like Discipline, Salvage, Hidden Blade, and even Death Grip. But if you don't necessarily see those, there's going to be multiple times that you feel like that you're top decking. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as you're able to build up the board, it's still a possibility here. Likewise, one of the downsides of this deck is going to be that you might not have a turn 1 play. What I mean by that is, if you don't start with one of your 6 options that are 1-cost gear, then you might just be starting on the wrong foot, giving your opponent a chance to get to get a little bit ahead there. One thing that can be nice, though, is you can at least play out even something like a Desert Call to at least get a unit down, or things like that. But even still, it's like, if you don't start with one of your 1-cost gears, it can feel like you're already starting with an arm tied behind your back. But all in all, this is just a really fun deck here. Now, lastly, this is not one that I think a lot of people are going to be expecting, and it's one that I will be explaining why I picked Sett as the very last one. Now, I really wanted to also pick Fiora here, but I'm very curious on where Fiora fits in this meta. Yes, there has been a Fiora that has gotten 2nd place twice at China Regionals. One that was just a regular Fiora, and one that was a baited hook Fiora. And I do think the baited hook Fiora is more powerful, but even still, I really want to watch a little bit out for Sett. I think there is something special here. Now, the reason why I say that in particular is because he was able to do decently well last meta. He wasn't anything that, stood out in particular, but he has just such a powerful legend ability here that when a buffed unit you control would die, you may recycle a rune and exhaust me to spend its buff and recall it exhausted instead. And then when you conquer, you can ready him. So guess what? You're going to be utilizing a lot of ways to be able to create buffed units and then take it to your opponent. One thing that I do really like about this deck list in particular is that orange is just already such a powerful color. Then you utilize that with yellow, and you get a really special combo here. Not only that, Akshan can be a big answer to a lot of different decks. There's a ton of equipment. They play out a spinning axe. Akshan takes that, he goes up to 7. that hurts. You know, I mean, that's one of the best parts about this, is that you can really take it to your opponent with that. You go against an Aurora deck, action. You go against, you know, someone that plays a BF sword, and it's like, well, guess what? Now I get that +3 might. You know, there's just a lot of really cool options. And if your opponent isn't playing equipment, well, you take action out. Now, not only that, Akshan, when he dies, he's going to be giving back the weapon. Well, if you're able to keep him alive just by spinning a buff, well, they're never getting that equipment back. So I really do like this combo. One thing that always does suck about these options, though, and what really made it difficult for Sett originally, was the fact that it just didn't have a ton of card draw. Yes, you're running things like Hidden Blade. That's great and all. But again, that's maybe your only card draw. There is some really good card draw that you could also utilize here, that allows you to draw one for each mighty unit. That might be something for you to be able to consider, but even still, you look at the board state here, and there's not a whole lot of mighty units early game, but mid to late game, it could be drawing you even 3 to 4 cards, which could be making a really big difference for you. Now, one thing that I also will say is to why I picked this deck in particular is that when we are looking at, for example, the regionals where we had the Annie and the Azir win, we also had Sett do incredibly well. He only was 1.6% of the field at 8 decks entered in at day 1, but still in top 64, he had 3 make it. Not only that, though, he also had 1 in 12th place and 1 in 16th place. Now, again, I still think that there is a couple of adjustments that need to be made, but even outside of that, there's been a couple of times where he's been able to get a first place finish, and that's why I think that this might be a little bit of a sleeper deck for you to be able to consider. And again, you just got some really great options here. I mean, heck, even like a Ruin Runner can be a big option for you because you just can't be chosen by enemy spell or abilities. Okay, cool. So then you add some equipment to it, or you also buff it, and there's just ways that you just can't get rid of Ruin Runner. You finally get over the might, and oh, by the way, it's just back in base now. It's going to be coming back this next turn. And you're like, oh, great. Thanks for that. Not only that, one of the big things that can really shut down purple decks in particular is going to be Challenge. It's one of the best cards to be able to combat against Draven decks and purple decks alike, because it just says you choose a friendly unit and an enemy unit. They deal damage equal to each other, or their mights to each other. You do have to watch out against Dravens with spinning axes, but otherwise it's like, all right, cool. You know, I live, you die. Cool, I'm fine with that. You know, and even if they want to use their fight or flight to move their unit back to base, it doesn't matter. Challenge just says anywhere. So again, it's just something really helpful to really take it to your opponent here. And so I think there's something here with Sett. Again, if you did want to select a Fiora, you definitely could in this case, and Fiora is a really good deck to be able to consider, but at the same time, I mean, I am very impressed with what this deck is able to do. So anyway, guys, again, that is going to be the 3 decks that I think could be the underdogs of this meta. Could be something to really surprise your opponents, especially if you take these to your local Nexus Knights. Now, luckily, Annie is a lot easier to pilot, in my opinion, than what you saw last set. Last set, it was like very situational. You had to know your deck list options. You had to know where you had to go here to be able to get things done. And it was like, okay, well, if I'm going against a Kaisa, this is what I have to do. If I'm going against a Sett, this is what I have to do. If I'm going against a Yi, even something else entirely. Okay, cool. Aurora especially, that was an annoying one. But you still had a good matchup into Aurora. It just was really annoying. But anyway, you guys get the point. Whereas now that we're more unit heavy, Annie is a lot more manageable in this case. So I do like this option here. Now, at the same time, I do want to say that this is still going to be a very... We're getting more and more of a defined meta. But I feel like there is still a lot left to be explored. I feel like that a lot of us are getting onto the hype of Set 2 Legends when we could take a step back and take a look at maybe what is already there. And so we'll see if there's maybe some surprises that are going to be coming this weekend with Italy and with Vegas alike. But until then, guys, that's going to be it for now. Have a good one.